Okay, so in this slide you see Sir Thomas Robert Malthus, and he was the intellectual rival of David Ricardo, but even though they had this rivalry, they also maintained a very close personal friendship. And it actually turned out that David Ricardo passed away before Thomas Malthus, and it was Thomas Malthus who spoke the eulogy at the funeral of David Ricardo. And at his funeral he basically said some things like that he never had such a great friend like David Ricardo, and that he will miss him, and the discussions that they had. So they disagreed pretty much on many things at the time, but they were very, very close friends. But anyhow, so one of the rivalries was that Thomas Malthus saw England headed for a catastrophe. And what he observed was that the production of agricultural output could not keep up with the increase in the population, or with the population growth. And ultimately Thomas Malthus predicted that England was headed for a catastrophe. So specifically you can think of what Malthus saw as a situation like this. So here on the x-axis we have time. So Malthus looked at some data, and he looked at agricultural output. And he observed that over time this output follows this. So it increases, but it increases at diminishing rates. So this function is essentially similar to a utility function that we already introduced earlier. And so he observed that agricultural production is subject to diminishing returns. And of course that makes sense, because if, let's say, the population grows and we have to cultivate ever more arable land, of course you first cultivate the most fertile land, and then you move to the one that requires more work and maybe more fertilizers. So that makes a lot of sense. But at the same time the population grew exponentially. So the population grew something like this. So the prediction of Malthus was that that England was heading towards a catastrophe in which agricultural production can no longer anymore keep up with population growth, and there will be starvation and probably also not only starvation but also riots and food riots, and that needed to be avoided. So that was the Malthusian growth trap, and let's take a look at that again in more detail in the next video.